it, because quite frankly, I'm not, I don't have any blanket recommendations when it comes to diet in general. Of course, there's certain extremes that I want you to avoid, and we'll be talking about that in terms of the ketogenic diet. And I've done that, for quite some time, where, we talk about various different diets, not with me necessarily recommending one. I certainly, if I think about it, probably recommend, overall more probably a Mediterranean type diet, but ultimately it comes down to your unique genetics, your situation, what's possible for you. As they always say, the best diet that you go on is the one that you can stick with. So all diets in general, if we're looking at it from the perspective of weight loss, almost all of them, if you follow them, you're going to lose weight. The question is it sustainable? Is it going to promote longevity? Many of you know that many of the week's classes have been focused on understanding factors that contribute to overall longevity. So these sorts of things are the things that concern me. Obviously, there are situations where, first and foremost, for someone's health, the most important thing is for them to lose weight, because even a very quick turnaround when it comes to someone who's gaining weight and then when they switch to losing weight, the metabolic changes and the impacts in their overall health can be so profound that at that point in the very beginning, sometimes, any kind of weight loss is potentially beneficial for them. But ultimately tonight, as I said, we'll be talking about the ketogenic diet, not in a way that I'm recommending it, but so that you understand it. And if it's something that you think is worthwhile for you in the circumstance that you're in, then you'll have the resources to understand what makes it healthy, what makes it unhealthy. Because obviously with everything, you can be doing something in a very unhealthy fashion. So let me share my screen and we'll jump right into tonight's episode. Okay, so you should see my screen. Let me blow this up a little bit. And since we have, looks like we have a fair number of new people attending tonight's class, this is called a mind map. And I like to use these mind maps only because it allows me to organize the information and for you to actually see it in a clear sort of outline that makes it, I think, easier to understand. So we'll talk about basic physiology when it comes to what ketosis and ketogenic diets are, why one would go on a ketogenic diet, types of ketogenic diets, what the so-called keto flu is something that people can feel, in the beginning, often when they're getting into ketosis and getting used to the ketogenic diet. Talk about some other side effects. We'll talk about what the term fat adapted means. It's something that's used a lot in the keto movement. And then the 5 mistakes that I see in my patients and clients who are looking to use a ketogenic diet. And then at the end, as always, we will have a quiz. So I gotten a lot of good feedback on that. So we'll continue with that probably on the 4th or 5th week where we have a little quiz. All right, so let's jump right into it and talk about the basic physiology. So probably if you're on this episode, you probably already know that the preferred fuel of your body is glucose or blood sugar. But when there's no access to blood sugar, generally speaking, under 50 grams of carbs, then what happens is that you can enter what's called a ketogenic state, where your body is basically using ketones and fatty acids for energy. So what happens is that and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail later, but when your carbs go low, generally speaking, your insulin drops. And this allows fatty acids that are basically released from your fat to go to the liver, and then the liver itself produces the ketone bodies. So these ketones, your body can use fatty acids as well. It's not just ketones that are used by the body, but when it comes to the brain, your body actually needs these ketones. So, we have the ability to use fatty acids, but our brain can't. So your body has come up with a mechanism, which is ketones, to be able to sustain your brain during periods of low, starvation, or in this case, when your carbs are incredibly low. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that your body always has some blood glucose around. Now, this is an important thing to remember, because even when your ketones are at a reasonably high level, you still have blood sugar going around your body. This can come from proteins, because proteins can in the liver be converted into blood glucose. Now, keep this in mind as we get into talking about some people are using the ketogenic diet for cancer. And in that case, they use a measurement called the glucose ketone index. And it's basically essentially a formula that calculates sort of the ratio between these two numbers. Now, why that's important is, one, it acknowledges, obviously, for just the layman, that it's important to know that your body is always going to have some blood sugar around. It's not like your body has switched over to completely using ketones or fat as fuel, as people like to say. As an example, 3 days of fasting or starvation, and the brain is receiving 25% of its energy from ketone bodies. The rest is from blood sugar, even though you are not eating any. So that's an important part of the physiology for people to understand. I often talk to people and they think that somehow their body is running purely on ketones or fat. And that's actually not the case. If your blood sugar goes too low, you basically will pass out and die. That's the situation. And in fact, when people who are doing metabolic treatment of cancer, and I've met many of sort of the leading figures in that space, a lot of them say that if somehow we could really get the blood sugar a little bit lower, and have the ketones at a higher rate, that it's possible that some of the changes that you see in cancers would probably turn away. But there's this limit. Your blood sugar just can't go too low, or else, as I said, you're not going to be around for very long. After many, many days of fasting, and when you're in ketosis, more than 25%, I think it can actually go up to 70 or 80% of the energy of the brain can actually be coming from ketones. There's a lot of confusion in the lay public about ketosis and ketoacidosis. Now, ketoacidosis is something we see in type 1 diabetics, sometimes in people in alcoholics, rarely in type 2 diabetes, but it's basically a situation where you have extremely high blood glucose and ketones, which creates this acidotic state. And that, of course, can be life-threatening. So we have this basic idea now that we understand that we have blood sugar always in our bodies, but at a certain point when your carbohydrates are lower, your body produces these ketones as a supplemental fuel. And so let's go through what these ketones are. But before we go through that, so the ketones get liberated, they can be used, and then we'll get into these sorts of ideas like metabolic flexibility and fat adapted a little bit later on. But from where we are now, I think all of you hopefully understand just sort of the basics of what's going on. Okay, so your body, your liver specifically, is capable of taking these fatty acids and converting them into ketones. And there are basically three primary ketones. There's acetoacetate, there's beta-hydroxybutyrate, and then there's acetone. Now, initially, your body starts with acetoacetate. And acetoacetate, eventually, when your body becomes efficient, converts that over to beta-hydroxybutyrate. Acetoacetate actually gets spilled in the urine. So when you're doing sort of test strips for urine, then what it's measuring is the acetoacetate. Your body breathes out acetone, and the beta-hydroxybutyrate is really the main sort of functional ketone that your body is using. It's capable of using acetoacetate, but ultimately acetoacetate is going to convert into beta-hydroxybutyrate. And as time goes by, your body becomes more efficient at converting this sort of initial stage of ketone formation into beta-hydroxybutyrate. So let's just review this. So this gets put into the urine. Now, what happens is that it sort of spills over into your kidneys, and then you measure that as the ketones. One of the reasons why urine measurements of ketones, those strips that you can buy, are not that effective. Well, one is, of course, the concentration is going to be affected by how well hydrated you are. The second is that this is sort of spilling over. So it's not necessarily a good indicator of what's going on with beta-hydroxybutyrate, because in fact, your body becomes more efficient at converting this chemical into this chemical, which is what we test in the blood. So this might be getting hopefully not too complicated, but beta-hydroxybutyrate is basically the main ketone that we talk about. When you check your blood, you're checking for beta-hydroxybutyrate, and basically your body becomes more efficient as time goes by at creating this beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is what, again, you check in your blood. Therefore, if you're going to be checking blood ketones, you want to get a ketone meter. I recommend one called from a company called Keto Mojo. I've met the owners many times, and I'm always, whenever thankfully, I should say, it's been a very interesting experience because, of course, as you know, I'm in the health food industry as well as being a physician. And, you really get to know the owners of all these brands, not so much in the last year because all the trade shows have closed, and you can see who is sort of in it for, making a quick buck, and who really believes in their product and its ability to improve the health of people. And I can say that the people from Keto Mojo, they really are great people, and I highly recommend their ketone meter. It also checks your blood glucose as well. So it's a traditional glucometer in addition to being able to test your ketone levels. And we'll get into all the things about what the ketone levels are and all that in a bit. All right, so we have a basic understanding of how you get into ketosis. You have a basic understanding of getting some questions here. Sorry, let me just exit my screen here one moment. And it's best if someone has questions, if you put it into the chat box, because unfortunately it's more difficult for me to see the question section. But give me a moment and I will try to. Okay. So if you can, I'm a medical doctor. Someone's asking what kind of doctor. I started out, sorry, if you can just go over to the chat box, it's much easier. Okay. So someone's asking what type of doctor I am. So we have a fair number of new people on. So I'm a medical doctor, and initial training, and then I did training in dermatology. So I'm a board certified dermatologist, and then got into a great deal of lifestyle medicine, which I did all along anyway. And now continue to practice dermatology as well as lifestyle medicine. And of course I have Miracle Noodle as well. So, all right. So why would someone go on to a ketogenic diet? So there are many reasons. Weight loss obviously is one. Reduced appetite. Certain diets have more of a pronounced impact on appetite than others. Certainly, the ketogenic diet is one where you definitely have a great reduction and an explained reduction in appetite. Better blood sugar, better blood pressure. Cancer, we'll talk about in a moment. And of course, in the 1920s, essentially, it started as a treatment for seizures way back in the 1920s. And the reason is because they noticed that when the brain was utilizing more of its energy from ketones, that the electrical stability of the brain was better. And brain health, I didn't write a whole lot, but these two sort of go hand in hand, but there have been a lot of studies on certain brain cancers that have shown some impact. Now, keep in mind that all of these can be found in lots of different types of diets. Of course, most diets will cause you to lose weight. Again, the question is always are you going to continue with it? And is it a sustainable program? High plant-based, diets also reduce your appetite and improve your blood sugar and blood pressure. Basically, anything that is going to improve your overall health should have an impact in this regard. Now, there's a lot of talk about using a ketogenic diet for cancer. And as I said, I've met several of the doctors who really are at the forefront of this, but I wanted to show this graph. I actually got it from the Keto Mojo website, ironically. And it basically shows cancers that are have some impact. In other words, the ketogenic diet has an impact on those tumors. Now, these over here are all brain cancers: glioblastoma, astrocytoma, medulloblastoma, all of these. And I've actually met a guy at one of the keto conferences who spoke, young guy who had a glioblastoma, which is just an awful tumor with almost like 100% mortality rate, who went on a ketogenic diet, and they have studies to show that there's some impact. It's not like everyone gets cured or anything like that, but for something like glioblastoma that it is such a terrible tumor, to show any effect is a pretty remarkable thing. But I wanted to point out that there are cancers where there's a pro-tumor effect. Specifically, kidney cancer. There have been some studies, I guess, with melanoma that I have not seen, but this graph does say that there could be a negative there, and a few that show that it might not be good for, this is preventive. So basically, we're talking about kidney cancer as being one that is basically going to grow. And who knows, right? I mean, the question is this is sort of a new field, and there have been very few studies regarding using a ketogenic diet for cancer. So the question remains is, if someone has cancer, you should talk with someone and you wanted to try a ketogenic diet, you really should talk to, there are a few people who are sort of in the know, experts in this field. If someone wants me to share those names at some point, you can certainly reach out to me. And you should talk to them really before you just willy-nilly just decide to go onto a ketogenic diet for cancer, because the type of cancer does make a difference. And it's hard to say, without proper studies, whether or not this is going to be good for the type of cancer that you have. So again, the key in that case is to reach out to someone who is dealing with what they call the metabolic approach to cancer, and get opinions from them. We spoke about this glucose ketone index, and they basically, for people with glioblastoma, try to optimize that, which involves really careful dieting. It can be a very, very difficult thing to get a very good control over having a very, very high, a therapeutically high ketone level, and then a very, very low glucose level. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay. All right, so there are many different kinds of ketogenic diets. And there's sort of the standard ketogenic diet. So it's moderate protein and high fat, low carb, usually somewhere around the 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbs. Obviously, I guess you can't really go through an entire talk about the ketogenic diet without mentioning the Atkins diet, which the one big problem with the Atkins diet was that he didn't really have a clear understanding of the impact of protein on these diets. And we now know that sort of high protein diets, there's really nothing beneficial for the majority of people to have an incredibly high protein diet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through tonight's talk. There's a cyclic ketogenic diet, which usually revolves around going out of ketosis once or twice a week, or various other patterns that people come up with. There's a targeted ketogenic diet where people sort of up their carbs around workouts so that they can get more of a impact in terms of being able to use those carbs during the workouts. High protein ketogenic diets, it's one that exists, but as we know, and we've spoken about many times in previous classes, especially for people who are under 60, under 70, the more protein that you have, the more you activate a whole host of things. It raises insulin levels, which can impact your ability to break down fat. It's going to raise what's called IGF-1, as well as what's called mTOR. Both of these we've spoken about at length, but basically the short end of it is that these decrease your longevity, a lot of specific longevity factors. So generally speaking, lower protein is going to be beneficial for most people. Obviously, you need proteins, very, very important. The point is that most people overdo protein. And again, a standard ketogenic diet is around 20% protein and 70% fat. And the key is obviously, as we'll talk about in just a moment, that the selection of the foods is going to be important. But since we're talking about macros here, we should be conscious of the fact that increasing your animal protein, as we already discussed, is going to cause that protein to get converted into blood sugar, in addition to the things that we spoke about. So protein is something that you do have to be careful about. Okay, there's this concept of dirty versus clean keto. Now, I think all of us probably can guess what that means. Clean keto is, well, let's start with what dirty keto is. Dirty keto is basically just eating whatever you want as long as you fit the macros of 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carbs, or thereabouts. Or in other words, eating whatever you want just to get into ketosis. Now, the problem with this line of thinking is that it basically is, it makes us seem like we are just a very, very simple creatures when it comes to overall health. And of course, this is, if that were the case, then we wouldn't be on episode 56 because things would be so simple. We just need to be in ketosis. The point of that matters is that basically you are needing to just acknowledge the complexity of the situation. So if you're just eating for macros, you are going to be ignoring pretty much almost every organ in your body. If we think about it from the perspective of, let's say, your gut. Okay, so when it comes to your gut, if you're just focusing on the macros, then basically what that means is that you are ignoring your gut microbiome. You are ignoring the toxins that are in food that are going to affect your microbiome. You're going to be ignoring, just micronutrients that are going to help overall with your microbiome. In other words, you can go organ by organ, and you're just ignoring all the science about what makes and helps those particular things, and just focusing on metabolism, and it's just not going to be good for you. Now, clean keto obviously is going to be a situation where you're paying attention to the food that you're eating. You're not eating processed foods, you're not eating processed oils, or you're not eating conventionally grown meats. You're focusing on trying to get a decent amount of vegetables, because we know that vegetables are good for you. Believe it or not, there are people who are in sort of they see things specifically through the lens of metabolism, and therefore do not acknowledge that there is any difference between dirty and so-called clean keto. And you meet these people at conferences, some of whom are doctors, unfortunately. So the point is that we've spoken about, just as an example, the gut microbiome so many times in the past. We have to acknowledge the fact that we all need leafy green vegetables, and we need high quality plant fibers in our diet to improve the diversity of the microorganisms in our gut. We know that is associated with a whole host of of effects throughout the entire body, from your brain to your heart, to your reproductive organs, a whole host of things that are associated with that. So while it seems completely obvious to everyone who probably has been here, unfortunately, it is something that needs to be said, because quite frankly, people get very excited when they get onto a ketogenic diet. And the reason they get excited is because there's actually a lot to be excited about. Once you get onto a ketogenic diet, you're in ketosis for the first time in a lot of people's lives. It's the first time that they realize how much they've been impacted by blood sugar going up and down. And we're talking about emotional lability and, quick to yell at people, and temper and energy level going up and down, and crankiness and cravings. And when all that, especially for people who've been eating, a standard American diet, when that all goes away and you really feel this sense of evenness and lack of cravings, and you realize how much that affected you in the past if you weren't eating cleanly, it can be a very difficult thing to, you feel like you've just made this amazing move because you feel so much better. But if you don't pay attention to all the little factors as things go on, in terms of getting the micronutrients you get, making sure that, again, your gut microbiome is staying the way it is, making sure that you are not overeating animal protein to an extent that's going to impact your overall potential for longevity. All of these things need to be taken into account. The problem is that, again, you get into this state, and ketosis also really is this feeling of ketosis. It makes you feel focused. Evolutionarily, when you are in ketosis, it makes you more focused to find your next meal, because if you were in ketosis evolutionarily, you were in a situation where you needed to find food. You were going through a period of not getting, period of drought, or of not having food. And so your mind wakes up as well. So again, for the first time in some people's lives, once they get through the initial stages of ketosis, they just feel incredible. What I'd like to say to all of you is that there are ways that you can get that without having to go into ketosis. And the way you do that is you become, what I have speak about many times, is you become metabolically flexible. You do try to earn the right of giving your body the ability to burn sugar and burn fat. Now, the best way to do that for me and for my patients and clients is to put them on what's called a biological fasting diet, which we spoke about last week, which is a 5-day reduced calorie diet. And that is by far the easiest way, one, to get into ketosis, and two, to restore some sort of metabolic flexibility, because you do it once a month for 3 months, and it basically makes you metabolically flexible, all the while, teaching you and giving you the experience of this ketosis so that you can understand what really is impacting your blood sugar. Many of us just have no clue how much of our crankiness, how much of our not feeling energy is related to our blood sugar going all over the place, which is a lot of the reason why I speak a lot about understanding what your blood glucose is. I always recommend people actually try to find out what their insulin levels are as well. So there's so many things we've spoken about before that relate to this overall idea that we're talking about. But needless to say, for anyone on this talk, obviously, you know that you need to be eating leafy greens. And if you're going to go to a ketogenic diet, don't fall into the trap of thinking that, a block of cream cheese and a block of cheese for breakfast, and a big steak, and what I'm saying. Like, you can have a very unhealthy meat and cheese centric diet, and we'll talk about why that's bad in more detail in just a moment. But I think all of us know that that's not going to be the case. Okay, so someone's asking about what percent of the calories. So you can look at the grams of fat, and those are 9 calories per gram, and that 4 for carbs. So you can multiply out the number of grams, and you realize that you get 9 calories per gram versus 4 with fat. So you don't need as many grams to get 70% fat as you would to get 70%, 70% protein, in other words. So Vicky, that's basically how you measure that if you want to look at it from a calorie perspective. Okay, let's keep on moving along. And let's talk a little bit about the keto flu. And this is basically something that happens as people are transitioning from burning sugar to burning fat. There are many reasons why. I think, quite frankly, it's a constellation of symptoms that people get that are related to a whole host of things. One is probably withdrawal from addictive foods. Many of you know that I recommend everyone try an elimination diet at some point in their life, which involves either going off of wheat, dairy, and sugar for a certain period of time. And I can tell you that for most people who are used to eating bread every day, when you get off of bread for even a couple of days, you really can feel a blah and a type of withdrawal that you can go through. The same thing happens with people who eat a lot of cheese. Cheese and wheat are addictive foods. They have chemicals in them that have actually been shown to be addictive. And when you get off of them rapidly, you can go through a period of withdrawal where, again, you just sort of feel blah and cranky. And so part of the keto flu is probably related to that. Dehydration. Now, dehydration happens for a couple reasons. One is in your muscles, you have something called glycogen, and glycogen is like a ready source of sugar for you. And you hold a certain amount of glycogen. It's like a way to store, an additional way to store energy. Of course, if you're going into ketosis, you've already used up the glycogen that's in your muscles. So there's a net decrease in the amount of water absorption or water that your muscles are holding. So there's less water in your overall body. And that can basically cause you to not have as much net water in your body. Additionally, when your insulin can drop when you're on a ketogenic diet. So your kidneys are responsive to insulin. Insulin can cause your kidneys to absorb absorb insulin. So if your insulin is low, your kidneys can release more sodium than usual. And if it's releasing sodium, water is going to follow that. So you can have this decrease in water there as well. So, and that can lead to a decrease in electrolytes, which can lead to cramps, specifically magnesium, potassium, and sodium. Now, potassium is found in lots of vegetables. So if you're eating an enormous amount of vegetables, which I recommend that everyone everyone should do, then you're probably going to get a good amount of potassium. But people who are on a ketogenic diet do need to make sure they're getting enough salt. In fact, they can use a little more salt than usual because of the situation that they're in. They're losing electrolytes through the kidneys, and people can get really bad cramps. So you need to make sure you you increase your hydration more than you would expect. It's very common to have a sense of thirst, even when you go through the biological fasting program we have. It's called the Body Mastery Method that I spoke about last week. You do have to be careful. Once those glycogen stores in your muscles, which hold on to the water, go away, you really need to make sure you're hydrating as much as you can to reach sort of the same state of hydration that you had before. What are some other things? Brain fog, dizziness, nausea. Some people get diarrhea, heart palpitations. It's thought to be related to that sodium loss, which is related to the insulin dropping. Again, muscle cramps, which we spoke about. There was a study that showed that caffeine can make this worse. Potassium, salt, magnesium again, and some people can get body aches. So the answers to all these should seem fairly obvious. And those are: get your electrolytes. You can use the sports electrolytes. It's very common for people to add a pinch of say, Redmond's salt, which is from Salt Lake, or use a Concentrace is a brand that has trace elements that you can just add a couple drops to water. Walk, rest, and rehydrate, basically, because if you're not walking, you need to move, basically. If you don't move, we've spoken about how important it is to walk, but in general, you need to walk. So, and then rest if in the beginning. Most people get through this if they hydrate and take their electrolytes and they get through it. What are some other side effects? And now I'm not mentioning these side effects to convince you not to go on a ketogenic diet at all. So I don't want you to think that that's the case. I'm just going through the ketogenic diet and how to avoid some of the pitfalls if it's something that you choose to do after knowing, as much as you can know. And we'll get into why it's important for you not to rely on me or videos on the internet, but to sit down and to spend a month reading a book about the ketogenic diet so that you can really understand it from a deep level. Because when you're dealing with something that if you do it wrong, it really is pretty bad, versus doing it right and it can having a very beneficial effect. And those two things are very far apart, and you need to be able to identify them. I can't tell you how many times I'll have a patient who's coming to see me for weight loss or some lifestyle intervention, and I say to them, they say, "Oh, I'm on a ketogenic diet," and they've never read a book, they've never checked their blood ketones. They've watched a few videos, and sure enough, they think that they know enough. I can tell you that in this case, in this particular diet, you need to put in the time to really understand it deeply. And again, I'm not saying that either to convince you not to do it, just that if you're going to do it right. Constipation, electrolytes, again, contribute to it. Not eating vegetables and getting fiber. There are a lot of people who just, they're so excited that they can eat meat and cheese and have fat bombs and all these sorts of things and see positive impacts in their health. But those are the immediate impacts. We want to focus not just on the immediate impacts. I've mentioned that immediate impacts are important for certain people. Again, getting that weight off right away is going to be an incredibly important thing, but you should be looking way into the future. And in that case, you need to make sure you're getting your leafy green vegetables. The keto diet is not an excuse to pig out on meat and cheese at the expense of your gut microbiome and a host of other things, which by the end of this class, you'll have a clear understanding of. I've seen patients this time in my dermatology practice with what's called telogen effluvium. This is a condition that happens 3 to 4 months after a really sudden change in something. It could be a death in the family. It could be, in this case, a sudden change in diet. And what happens is your hair grows through various phases. It goes through a growing phase, a resting phase, and a shedding phase. And what happens with this condition is because of this sudden insult to the body, your hair gets pushed into this sort of situation where your growing phase is shifted, too much of it's shifted into the resting phase, which lasts around 3 to 4 months, which means that 3 to 4 months after you go onto the ketogenic diet, again, this doesn't happen with everyone. In fact, it's a small percentage of people, but I've seen it, that the hair then goes into the shedding phase. Now, the hair all grows back eventually, but you have to wait over the next several months for it to regrow. One way to avoid this is to ease into the ketogenic diet. But even in that case, sometimes just the switch from being, just eating so poorly and with high blood sugar and then switching and having this impact move in the other direction, it can be enough of an insult to the body that you can get this type of hair loss. Headaches, similar. It can be low blood sugar. It could be dehydration, again, electrolyte imbalance. And I've spoken about it at length that, toxins there are many fat-soluble toxins. If you're interested, I've given 2 episodes on toxins. You can go see that on my YouTube channel. And we've spoken at length about how toxins are released from the fat. In other words, they're stored in the fat. So when the fat is gone, you've burned that fat, it gets released into the blood. Unfortunately, for people who are on very, very low fiber diets, you need to be able to bind that toxin and take it out. Unfortunately, if you don't have any fiber, it can get reabsorbed into the body, and this can create a situation where people feel really, really sick when they start losing weight. So again, another reason why it's important to eat green leafy vegetables with fiber. Of course, you could take fiber, chia seeds, flax seeds. These all have a good amount of fiber in them as well, and hemp seeds as well. These are all important things to incorporate. But that would be a lecture on how to do the ketogenic diet, which is what this one is not about. So what's fat adapted? It's a term that a lot of people use. It's not a scientific term. It's similar to metabolic flexibility in the sense that it does denote a state where you're basically very good at using fat as fuel. But theoretically, what fat adapted is more of an observation for people that are on the ketogenic diet. That is basically somewhere around 4 weeks after they've been on the ketogenic diet that they just start feeling so much better. And in this case, what's happening is theoretically that the body has really, it's really like preferring fat over glucose. Now, remember from the beginning, we spoke about the physiology here, that even when you go into ketosis, you still have blood sugar, and your body can still prefer to use that. In fact, blood glucose is your preferred fuel. What people are saying when people are fat adapted, again, not scientific, but sort of observation, is that about 4 weeks, some earlier, some more later, probably is related to insulin levels. Remember, we spoke about how insulin can turn off the ability of your body to burn fat. And if you had chronically high levels of insulin, unfortunately, a lot of America has hyperinsulinemia from all the sugar and meat and cheese that they're eating. Anyway, after about 4 weeks, your body becomes more efficient at using fat. It's as if your body is now used to preferring fat over glucose. And in that case, what's been observed is that carb cravings disappear. There's more satiety when you eat. You really feel satisfied with the meals that you're eating. You don't get kicked out of ketosis if you have a little extra carb intake. There are people, you're very somewhat rigid in the beginning where, you can have, you might have too many starchy vegetables and it can kick you out of ketosis. But when people are fat adapted, it seems as though they can, if they do get out of ketosis, for one, they don't get out of ketosis with a little more carbs. And two, if they do, they can get back into it a lot faster. And so this is this observation that people say that you're fat adapted. Okay, so we're going to end tonight's class with the 5 mistakes that I see. And we've probably already gone through all of them. And then we will go through the quiz. Okay, so here are the 5. The first is not reading a book. I spoke about that before. You cannot learn the keto diet from watching YouTube videos. And the reason, including mine, you need to read a book or two and really study the subject so that you have a clear understanding of the process. Next, eating too much meat and cheese. We spoke about that. I mean, I should say, not eating enough vegetables. In other words, don't get so excited with the ability to eat meat and cheese all the time, and don't mistake that for being some sort of healthy diet. Even if you're getting improvements, again, we're talking about putting you in a situation where you have the potential of living the longest, healthiest life possible. Not paying attention to insulin. So we spoke about how meat and cheese and obviously sugar are going to raise insulin, but this sort of meat and cheese issue is, which can raise your insulin levels, is going to have an impact on your keto, especially with the protein, because the protein, again, it gets converted to sugar and makes it a little bit more difficult for you to maintain ketosis because it's getting converted into to sugar. The point is your body doesn't have a storage mechanism for protein. It's not capable of, when we eat too much sugar, that gets converted into fat, and then we can store the fat. But as an example, let's think about it from this perspective. Okay, so we have carbohydrates. As I said, carbohydrates have a storage mechanism. It's not huge, but it's the glycogen that we spoke about in the muscles that's holding on to that water that we spoke about. So there's a little bit of a reserve of your body to be able to hold on to water, a little bit, to carbohydrates, I should say. Too much of that is basically going to get converted into fat and then stored in fat. Protein, you need protein to upkeep your body is made of, a lot of protein. So you need to have a certain amount of protein. But if excess protein, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So what does it do? It gets converted into sugar. And if there's too much sugar, then that gets converted into fat. So that's sort of the way you should think about it. So if the insulin level is high, you're not going to be able to break down fat. And if you can't break down fat, you really can't go into ketosis. And it's going to also impact your ability to stay in ketosis. Not checking your blood. You have to, if you're really going to take this diet seriously, you have to get a ketone meter. Now, I have a ketone meter. Now, I'm not on a ketogenic diet. This is a Keto Mojo, like I said. But when I'm doing my fasting, my biological fasting program, I like to see what kind of ketosis I'm in, each day, just something more of a curiosity for me than anything else. And I also like to check my blood sugar on occasion as well. So not every, you have to learn how to prick your finger. And the first time you do it, most people are a little squeamish. You're holding that thing and you squeeze it and, you jump a little bit, but honestly, you get used to it. And you start learning things about your own health, whether that's just looking at your blood sugar as an example, that are very impactful for your overall health. Next is ignoring saturated fat. It seems like a lot of people who are on the ketogenic diet just feel like saturated fat doesn't mean anything because, quite frankly, I'm in ketosis. And since I'm in ketosis, it doesn't matter what kind of fat I eat. But unfortunately, that is not a wise way to go about it. First of all, there are different genes you have. The ApoA2 gene is people have that gain weight. And I see that, I do nutrigenomic analysis on people. And quite frankly, it's I see a lot of people with this gene. In other words, these people with these genes gain weight more than other people with the same amount of saturated fat in their diet. ApoE4, people may have heard of that because it's associated with Alzheimer's. They do better with a low saturated fat diet. Additionally, when people have increased saturated fat in their diet, they also have higher levels of what's called endotoxemia. This is what some of you may have heard of, is something called a lipopolysaccharide. But the point about it is this allows like toxins from bacteria to get out of your gut into your blood, which causes a certain amount of inflammation in your body. And this is basically carried with saturated fat. So there are still reasons to be conscious of your saturated fat. An additional one is that some people just have familial issues with cholesterol that they're very responsive to their cholesterol increasing with saturated fat to a sufficient extent that it's going to increase their risk for heart disease. So there are plenty of reasons for specific people, and one could say almost everyone, to at least be conscious of saturated fat. That's more of what the way I would say it. Okay, so to summarize, we went over the basic physiology. You understand how people get into ketosis. We spoke about how blood glucose maintains itself on while you're in ketosis. We talked about why there are reasons to go into it. We spoke about different types of ketogenic diets. And by the way, since I didn't mention it, I don't feel anyone should stay in a ketogenic. There are very few situations where I feel people should stay in a ketogenic diet if they're just doing it for weight loss and such. Obviously, if people are on some specific seizure protocol or something of that sort, then of course, that's something that you want to stay in ketosis. We spoke about the keto flu and some of the remedies and understanding why it happens, as well as some of those side effects. We talked about what fat adapted is versus metabolic flexibility, but essentially your body seemingly preferring fat at some point in time. And then we spoke about the 5 mistakes that I see. So let's go over to the quiz, and then we'll call it a night. All right, let me share my screen again. And let's see if I can find, oh, I should show you. Let me just show you this. So this is from Keto Mojo. And this just shows what blood ketones look like. So nutritional ketosis begins at 0.5. And when people are doing therapeutic, like if they're on it for cancer or something, they usually look for 3 to 5. When you're just doing the ketogenic diet, just as long as you're in nutritional ketosis above 0.5 is a great start. As an example, when most people do the biological fasting program that I spoke about last week, which we still have some openings for. So if you're interested, please do reach out to me. It's a 12-week educational program that really reworks your metabolism for optimal health. So if you're interested in that, please do reach out to me. When I'm on the biological fasting program, I'm around 2 is what I get on the 3rd day of the biological fasting program. So anyway, I wanted to show you that. All right, let's go to see if I can find the test. I'm actually having trouble finding it. We might not be able to. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here's the class. All right. So let's go to the test and preview test. Okay, start test, and let me blow up the screen. Okay, well, I just went over this, so let me pull up the chat box here. It's disappeared on me. Let's see. Okay. All right. So what is the blood level of start of nutritional ketosis? 0.2, 0.4, 0.5, 0.7. Correct. 0.5. Why is too much meat a problem on the ketogenic diet? It can get converted to glucose. It can raise insulin levels. If often eaten, it's poor has poor quality. I don't know how I phrase that, but has poor quality toxin-ridden conventional meat, raises IGF-1 and mTOR, which have been shown to potentially reduce longevity factors. Correct. E, all of the above. Okay. This one's a tricky one. Which ketone is tested for in the urine? BHB, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, or acetone? Yes, it's actually acetoacetate. Correct. That was a tricky one. All right, which ketone is, I believe that's meant to say which ketone is tested in the blood. Okay, correct, BHB. And Shanti, I'll answer that question in just a moment. Which ketone is smelled in the breath? BHB, acetoacetate, or acetone? Correct. Yeah, that's right. Acetone. Of course, it makes sense because we all know acetone, the nail polish remover, acetone, same chemical, has that smell. Okay, which of the following is not associated with electrolyte imbalances? Constipation, hair loss, muscle cramps, headaches, or heart palpitations? That's a tricky one. The answer is hair loss. It's not associated with electrolyte imbalances. The others all have electrolyte imbalances associated with them. And again, correcting electrolyte imbalance is not an issue. Obviously, constipation, because several people chose constipation, is not primarily electrolyte imbalance. It's also been associated because you're not, a lot of people just drop all fiber and they become constipated because they're not getting any fiber. So definitely, it's probably not the number one cause of constipation. So a little bit of a poorly constructed question on my part. Going on a ketogenic diet that is low in healthy fiber does what to your gut microbiome? Improves diversity of organism, reduces diversity of organisms. Correct. And what we do know about the gut microbiome of healthy populations around the world, all of which are eating an enormous number of various types of fibers, is that their gut microbiome is incredibly diverse. And that diversity is associated with overall health throughout your entire body. Okay. Why can elevated saturated fat in the diet be a problem? In ApoE4 patients, lower saturated fat associated with better outcomes. Remember, that was sort of the Alzheimer's gene. In ApoA2, associated with weight gain, it increases endotoxemia, so those toxins getting into the body. D, all of the above. Correct. Everyone's getting that right. Okay, number 9. What does it mean to be fat adapted? You don't mind the taste of fat. You don't mind having fat. Your body is fully adapted to using fat as fuel with a decrease in cravings and more energy. Okay, that one was easy. Which of the following is not a function of insulin? Sodium retention, facilitates glucose entering the cell, can prevent fat from breaking down, generally acts as an anabolic hormone, is also known as the hunger hormone. That's a tough one. We spoke about sodium retention. So having high insulin is going to cause you to have sodium retention. When you go on a ketogenic diet, your insulin is going to drop, or at least it should drop. And then at that point, you're going to lose sodium as a result of low insulin. And therefore, when the sodium goes, the water goes, and the electrolytes go, and you become dehydrated. We know that insulin facilitates glucose going into the cell. That's sort of the main function. We spoke about how if you have high insulin, that's going to prevent what's called lipolysis, or breaking down of fat. So you have to be conscious of your insulin levels. Generally acts as an anabolic hormone. It does. But ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone. Anyway, that was maybe too difficult of a question. Your body can run solely on ketone bodies as energy. True or false? Correct. It's false. Remember, we all need that. We always have blood glucose running through our body, even when we're on a ketogenic diet. So if your blood sugar goes to nothing, you basically die. So our body is always keeping a certain amount of blood sugar in our bodies to be used. Which cancers have not been shown to have responded in some way to ketogenic diets? So these are all the, I don't know why I put the first one. The answer is renal cancers. So, and it could be that there are others as well, but we do know that a lot of the brain cancers have shown to have responded in some way to ketogenic diets. Okay, Shanti asked a question about egg protein. and whether it's as bad as other animal proteins. I don't want to make it sound like animal proteins are bad, and I know that you know that as well. However, if you had to, it's excess animal protein. That's the problem. So eggs are definitely animal protein, and it has to do with the amino acids that are in the protein. So while one could definitely say that eggs, don't come with some of the complications of animal proteins, it's certain amino acids like methionine, as an example, that are responsible for raising those things like mTOR and IGF-1 and those sorts of factors that have negative impacts on longevity. But again, if you're eating, you're vegetarian, eggs are not going, eggs are good, in general, if you're, if you're not eating them to excess. And quite frankly, it's somewhat hard to eat them to excess. I mean, they have, I think it's like 6 to 8 grams of protein per egg. I mean, unless you're eating, 7 or 8 of these a day, you're probably not overeating the eggs. As far as plant protein, they don't have the amino acid profile that has the impacts that we spoke about. So you can have a fair amount of animal protein, plant protein, you're not going to have that impact. But when it comes to the animal protein, including eggs, it has those enzymes that impact those factors that we spoke about. So, all right. So we've come to the end of the hour, and thank you everyone for your attention. We have an interesting class next week. Now, next week, we're going to be speaking about traditional medicine from the perspective of the West. In other words, when you look around the world, as an example, we talk about India, like Ayurvedic medicine tends to sync well with the religions in India. Same thing in China. Traditional Chinese medicine sort of syncs very well with the philosophic religious traditions of that area. So what about the West? Is there a Judeo-Christian medicine? And my answer to that is yes. And next week, I'm going to be discussing what Judeo-Christian medicine is. In other words, is there a traditional healing that is in our tradition that perhaps we're not paying attention to? And I believe that there is. And next week we'll be talking about that. So I hope you'll find that interesting. I look forward to seeing all of you there. I wish everyone a great night, and I hope everyone stays well. And I will see you next Wednesday night. Have a great night.